You're listening to BiggerPockets Radio, simplifying real estate for investors large and small. If you're here looking to learn about real estate investing without all the hype, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and be sure to join the millions of others who have benefited from BiggerPockets.com, your home for real estate investing online.
What's going on, everyone? My name is Brennan, host of the BiggerPockets podcast, here with my co-host, Mr. David Green. What's up, buddy?
What's up, Brandon? I am doing great, man. Just got back from Austin, Texas. I was there for Keller Williams Mega Camp at one of our Go Abundance events. So got a bunch of sun, had a bunch of fun, got to hang out with real estate people. I'm all pumped.
Did you throw axes again? I saw some pictures of axe throwing.
I didn't do that because I went out there on about 2 hours of sleep, and I didn't think it was a good idea to be that sleep deprived with weapons throwing them around. So that was the one thing that I skipped. That's
funny. That's one of the things I remember last year. I had a ton of time in Austin, a ton of fun doing was axe throwing. If you're listening to this show and you've not done axe throwing, you should probably do some axe throwing. So anyway, cool. All right. Well, before we get any further into today's show, which is an amazing show with an amazing guest who's just 20 years old, but is like clear on six-figure wholesale fees on stuff that we've never really even talked about on the show before. He's got a bunch of rental properties at this point, just crushing life at a young age. He's going to totally inspire you to do a lot of cool stuff as well. Everybody listening. But before we get there, let's get to today's quick tip. All right. Today's quick tip is very simple. Check out a new book. Readers are leaders, right? I'm just a big fan of reading. I just like reading an awful lot. And I thought me and David would both take a chance here real quick for our quick tip to recommend a book that we've been into lately. So I'll go first since I don't know if, David, you have a book in mind yet. But I'm reading one called Willpower Doesn't Work by Benjamin Hardy right now. And I really like it a lot. We saw him speak at Go Abundance thing actually a few years ago or a year ago. But and I kind of like read it quickly through it, but I'm going more deeply now through it now that it's like, I don't know, I'm like underlining and like there's just like so much in there that I'm just like blown away by. Just a lot of like studies and things about like what makes people successful. And the, kind of the point of it is if you're just relying on willpower to change anything in your life, it's not enough. You've got to change your environment. Environment is what matters more than anything, which is everything from how, like where you're working every day, where you're getting your stuff done, who's around you, who you associate yourself with, all that stuff. So Willpower Doesn't Work. Great book.
Awesome book. I love it. I'm reading Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. It's kind of a book about how to make very quick snap-second kind of decisions, learning how to read your gut, trust your gut. Like a lot of people you and I know that are on BiggerPockets, they get caught up in analysis paralysis. And there's this point of diminishing returns where you just keep thinking about something and you're not moving. And if you can prevent yourself from ever getting into that state at all, you're going to have a lot more success. So that's why I'm reading that book.
Nice. I'm sad to admit, Malcolm Gladwell is like the most famous business author like ever, and I've not read a single Malcolm Gladwell book. I think it's because like I'm sure they're great, and it's one of those like everyone tells me I need to read them, so then I'm like, no, I'm not gonna. But actually, really,
that's totally you, Brandon.
I know. I'm a rebel. What can I say? All right. Well, speaking of great books. If you haven't yet picked a copy of the Intention Journal from BiggerPockets that we launched a couple weeks ago, and there are still some copies available. They have not completely sold out yet. And if they have sold out, then I'll edit this later because I don't think they've sold out. We're recording this like a month early. But go pick up a copy at biggerpockets.com/journal. And now I think that's all we got. So today's guest is Josiah Pott. Josiah is a real estate investor out of South Carolina who is, like I said, just 20 years old. And the guy is just crushing it. I mean, he's got such good advice. Like, for example, he goes through 5 ways to get the phone number and to get the contact address for motivated sellers. Like really like it goes 5 really, really good ways to do that. He goes through this idea of like not necessarily starting with why or starting with how, but starting with who. And you'll see what he means by that in a second. And then he tells a story later about making like over $300,000 on a wholesale fee on a huge deal. It's super inspiring. And his entire story is inspiring. You're going to love this today. So without further ado, let's get to our interview with Josiah Pott. What's going on, Josiah? Welcome to the BiggerPockets podcast, man. Good to have you here.
Man, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's get into this. I want to cover the elephant in the room first and unveil the elephant. You are going on your 70th birthday, is that right? 75th?
Yeah,
something like that. Okay, how old are you?
I'm 20, so I'll be 21 in November.
All right, and before we get into your story, let's just get an idea of where are you at? What do you do? Where are you at today with your real estate? Like, what's that look like? What kind of real estate do you do? And what kind of like levels are you investing at?
So I invest all in residential, and I don't have anything against, any other areas of real estate, but I love residential because I feel like it's, an absolute need for everyone to have a roof over their head. Where I'm at right now is I'm doing a lot of development here in Greenville, South Carolina, and I have a group, and I kind of act as the acquisitions manager, I guess, if you want to say that. And so I make a lot of fees from finding property and setting it up to be developed, but I don't usually stay in the deals. So that's kind of how I've made my money, and then I use it to invest. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're gonna unpack all that. So why don't we begin at the very beginning? How did you get into real estate?
Okay, so and I know we didn't talk about this before, but my start in real estate was very, very young. I have a dad who is really into real estate, and who was, really into real estate. He was never the biggest mover or shaker, but he was huge on compound interest and stuff. And so the earliest memories that I have, I was homeschooled, and so I spent a lot of time with my family. And most of the time I learned from my mom or other teachers. But I, sometimes I had the chance to sit with my dad. I remember specifically long car trips where we would be, driving 12 hours or 14 hours, and my mom would take a seat in the back and I would get in the front, and my dad and I would just do, big like Excel sheets, of like amortization and compound interest. And we, he'd be like, okay, so if you invest $2,000 for this many years at this interest rate, what do you have? And like, I would just, sit there with my, eyes wide. And so I became really obsessed with compound interest, I think is what it started it all. And he had used real estate as a tool, to realize, interest. And so I kind of, saw that as my first go-to. And so, basically by the time I came around to high school, I had kind of lost sight of the whole real estate thing. I mean, it just didn't seem realistic for me because I was a high schooler. And so of course I did the normal thing. I went and applied at, a local restaurant, and then I applied at another one, and I didn't make either job. And so my dad, being very kind and generous, he owned a commercial property and allowed me to be the landscaper. And so nice. I got this little gig making, probably in profit, I made $500 or $600 a month, doing landscaping. And it was just enough to kind of, get me by, I guess, with the car payment and everything. And, basically after I did that for a little while, I went to college, and my dad he actually retired for half of the year, or for halfway retired, I guess. And we were able to start dabbling in real estate with some of his retirement. And so, we did a ton of stuff. We did contract for deeds, like lease to own kind of deals. We did a flip, which completely failed. We invested in tax liens. We did foreclosures, and it was all kind of, I didn't ever really make money doing it. But it was more like, I knew that I wanted to do real estate, and I was at Clemson, and I had my minor in like a real estate emphasis area of finance. And so I just wanted to kind of get out there and try stuff. And so we worked together to kind of, dabble.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you started by kind of working for your dad, I guess, almost in a way. Is that kind of, you were just kind of work, the landscaping, and then working on some of his deals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I always acted as some sort of acquisitions kind of manager. So he said, I want to do contract for deeds. Here are the parameters, and here's what I want to find. And so I would, put out bandit signs and do, little advertising things here and there, to try to find him deals. And then, we did a house flip together. He paid me $2,000 for it. And then we ended up, he asked for it back because we realized later that we lost money after accounting for interest. And so we did a lot of failed things. It's kind of sad for me to even think about talking about all of them, but we did tax liens. We invested like $1.2 million in tax liens. And we ended up with like 4 properties, and, 3 of them we paid more than we should have, like more than they're even worth. And, it's just, one of them, it took 8 months to evict the people. It's been been crazy. I mean, so we not everything has been fun, and that's how I came across like land development and wholesaling, is because, things sucked. Like everything that I touched, was terrible. Like I just completely failed. And so, once I finally got some traction with learning how these guys were making, $500,000 or $1 million a year, just setting up these developments to be taken, with pretty much zero risk. I knew that was something I wanted to be a part of.
So when did all this? I mean, you went from landscaping for your dad, and then in college kind of doing work for him, to eventually at some point, like now you're doing deals on your own, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like how did that transition happen? I'm wondering, one, how did the transition happen? How did that, like, was he like, all right, I'm kicking you out of the nest, go fly? Like how did that work? What's the story behind this, like going from there to where you are today?
That's a good question. So without getting like into personal stuff too much, like my wife and I, we started dating in September of 2017, and we decided to get married pretty shortly after, and we got married in April of 2018, and it was awesome, but it was also really difficult. And one of the biggest things that I was facing, in that decision-making process, of course, was how in the world am I going to, make money and support a wife. So we got married. We moved in with my aunt. She had a guest room, and so we had a little room to ourselves. And she was, amazing, and let us stay there for probably about 2 months. And then, we actually moved into my grandma's trailer, and all this time, we had, I'm not going to lie, we had received some generous gifts for getting married, which is kind of funny how that goes. But,
yep.
We were able to save up about $10,000 between we both had some money saved. I had planned to put it towards college, but ended up not. And then we received some gifts from getting married, and we were able to kind of use that $10,000 and say, okay, this buys us about 6 months, And so we knew if we could, either live with my aunt or at my grandma's trailer, and have a roof over our heads that we didn't necessarily have to pay for, that we could live on, canned fruit and chicken and rice, for 6 months. And so that's kind of how we set ourselves up to have the freedom to either massively succeed or massively fail. So we dedicated all of our time to pursuing real estate and development. And so I actually, when we got married, I sold the landscaping business. I dropped out of college. It was April, and the day after we got married, I was supposed to, it was a Monday, I was supposed to go to class, and I just told her I couldn't, so I was like, I gotta do something, because she was a server. And one thing I want to do, I want to make sure that everyone knows, like, we did not have it. Like, it sounds like, looking back, it sounds like it was a plan, like, oh, we give ourselves 6 months and it was like all planned out. It was totally not. I mean, we got married, and I could not stand leaving her at home and knowing that I'm going to college, spending money on my education, and which is, by the way, is not a bad thing, but I just personally couldn't handle that. It was really difficult for me to know that she was making, $200 or $300 a week, serving at a pizza restaurant, and I wasn't bringing anything to the table except spending her money. Yeah. So that was really hard for me, and the only way I could really handle it is by, trying to do something to provide, I guess. So
yeah, that's it's an interesting story. I like that. I mean, I like that you looked at it and you're like, hey, like, just because the script for life is get it, go to high school, graduate high school, go to college, get $50,000 or $100,000 in student loan debt, then go and get the job. You're like, that might be fine for some people, but it's not right for me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, and my wife always, like, whenever I talk about, like, our story, like, she always has to remind me, this wasn't always your plan. Because, of course, I would love to sit here and say that this was my plan to be 20 and not have to go to work and, be where we are now. But for me, I mean, I was in college when we were dating. My plan was to get an MBA. So not just 4 years, but actually 6 years in college, and then get a decent job and buy a house a year, because I had been listening to you guys for a long time. But, like, I wanted to get a house a year and then retire by the time I was, 50 or 55. And she was the one, to be honest with you, she was definitely the one who kind of switched that up and said, why wait? And so we started investigating ways to get started earlier. So
very cool. All right, well, walk us through that. So you got 10 grand. You're like, all right, well, that's gonna last me a few months. What did you do? Like, how'd you get your very first deal on your own then? What that look like?
So we used the first couple months let me start by saying I think I mentioned this to Kevin, but basically we always start with who, and of course you start with why, because like that's I'm not to say that's obvious, but I feel like it is. Like, you definitely need to have meaning behind what you do. But when we're actually going after a deal, like if we're we want to make $100,000 fee, we start with who. We don't start with what or when, or we start with who are we going to serve, and so nowadays that might be a big national builder or a small local builder, or we have these clients now who we know want specific things. But back then we only had really one contact who was a friend, I think, from church, and they were a builder, a really good guy, a Christian dude, and we just said like, hey, what are you looking for? And he happened to be a custom home builder. Custom home builders are a little bit more comfortable paying higher prices for lots, and so we went after certain areas that we knew they wanted to be in, because they don't make phone calls, they don't do cold calling, and so we were like, hey, we'll do it for you, and if we find you something, we'll sell it to you. And so Christiana, actually, my wife, she was calling on this little, it was probably a little group of like 20 or 30 houses. And she found 2 lots because they had said, we're interested in either houses or lots, but in these certain areas. And so she started calling, and she came across 2 lots, and the guy, said, no, and he didn't want to sell. And so long story short, it took her like 3 months and probably a dozen phone calls to finally get a meeting with him. And, and so we went over to the property and we met him, and it was, it was a long process, but that's how we ended up wholesaling our first deal and making, $20,000, which got us off of, maybe out of my grandma's trailer. Yeah. So that was kind of, our first baby step. And then we started, we used that to start buying rentals and, buy ourselves into more financial freedom.
So here's go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I've been hogging the mic. You can take it. You take it.
You know what I like about what you said is, rather than saying, how do I find a mentor? How do I find someone that will be my mentor? You went to a potential mentor and said, what do you need? And they said, well, I need lots to build on. And you said, okay, I'll go find that for you. And you made yourself $20,000. And I'll bet you learned a ton from that person, like a mentor. That is the perfect example of how, like, the right way to approach somebody is you went and made that person money, made yourself money in the process, and still got the education you were looking for. There's not a businessman that's successful in the world who's going to say, oh, I don't want your help helping me find the piece that I need to be able to make my business run.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I strongly believe that. I mean, I know you guys talk a lot about like givers and getters, and how like, the most successful people are actually givers, not the getters, and so, one thing that I always try to do, it's almost like a pact that we've made with ourselves, me and Christiana, is that, if we're going to do business with someone, we want to, serve them before we ask for anything in return. So like, I'm going to make them money before I try to make myself money. I want them. Yeah. I mean, I've gone as far as saying, people, I'll bring someone a deal and we'll run the numbers, and they'll say, man, it doesn't work. And I'll say, okay, does it work without my fee? And they'll say, yeah, I guess we can make it work. And I've just said, okay, go ahead, take it, because for me, it's like, it's long-term is just so much more important. Relationships are more important than any amount of money. So
yeah,
it's easier to say that now, but
yeah,
that's a really good point. Cause really, if they didn't buy it at all, it doesn't benefit you. So whether you let it go without a fee or you don't sell it at all, it's the same result. You might as well get something out of it, even if you're not getting money, which is, appreciation. And the law of reciprocity would say they're going to come back. And at least this person now cares about you and your business because you showed that you cared about theirs. Because the alternative would be, well, I'm just fine. I won't just sell it. I have no deal. And you did all that work for nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about, what do you have now? What's your portfolio look like today?
Okay, so I guess I can start by saying, like, once we made that $20,000 fee, we didn't go on a buying spree. We went pretty slow, and steady. And I think that was due to me still kind of having my my thoughts of, a house a year kind of thing. And so we went and I cold called a guy. It's always cold calling for us, but I cold called a guy, and we found a duplex near downtown Greenville, and we bought it. We probably bought it a little bit high. We bought it for $115,000. One side, me and Christiana actually like personally gutted and replaced the cabinets, and we did a lot of the work ourselves, just kind of looking on YouTube. And so that was our first rental. And I don't know how far you want me to go into that, but I mean, that kind of was what started for us the rental experience, I guess.
Nice.
Well, we'll ask you about each individual deal, but I'm trying to get an idea for your overall portfolio.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, I got it. So, I have this. So, what we have now is we have 2 duplexes near downtown Greenville. We have a couple single-family homes in and around Greenville. We have an 8-unit that we recently bought in April. We have a 16-unit down in Macon, Georgia, which is kind of like our cash flow property, and most of the rest are like appreciation based mostly. Mm-hmm. And then we have a duplex in Greenville, North Carolina, which Kevin mentioned, and then we have the home that we currently live in. And so, awesome. And then we have a handful of other properties that we have under contract, but that's kind of where we are right now. And honestly, I did not add up exactly how many units we have, but I think it's like 34. Which is, it's actually a funny story. I was listening to the podcast, and it was the first time that I had heard about the 90-day, I guess you called it a BHAG, or, like the big, hairy, audacious goal. That was about like 30 days ago, maybe 45 at this point. And we had 16 apartments. And I said, I want to get to 32 before 90 days from now. And now we're at, like 34. We've already.
That's awesome.
So it's been a really fun experience, and that was kind of something that I got from y'all. So
that's cool, dude. Yeah, I find that when you have that like so many people like don't achieve their goals because they don't have the clarity on what it is they want. So when you just define your goal, like I want to get 16 more units, I'm going to buy another apartment building, I'm going to buy whatever, I'm going to flip this many houses, wholesale this many deals, and you have that clarity, and then you put a deadline on it that's shorter than people think. I mean, everyone likes to do like annual goals, but I'm a big believer in the 90-day goal because you can accomplish anything in 90 days. Like,
well, yeah, you're up to like 1,000 mobile home units.
I think we're at like 500 right now. But yeah, the goal was 50. The goal was 50 pads, and we ended up getting 500 because like why not? Because once you have that clarity, like you can move so much faster. So I would just encourage everyone out there to try to get some of that clarity. And speaking of that, the journal, we are relaunching the Intention Journal. New edition comes out. I'm not sure what day this episode comes out, but it's either just before or just after this episode that new journal comes out. So make sure you pick up that at biggerpockets.com/journal. And all right, so what it sounds like is you are basically wholesaling vacant land to developers and then using the cash to both live and then invest in rental properties. Is that a good overall arcing view? All right, so the wholesaling vacant land, that's a cool thing. You kind of talked about your first time you got into it, how you found that deal for him. Yeah. Can we spend a few minutes talking about that? Because we've never really, I don't think, in 300 and some episodes, can we talk about like what does that even mean? Like what does it mean to wholesale vacant land? How do you make money off that? And then we'll go into how you're finding those and stuff like that.
Okay. So vacant land, I've always liked it. But the main reason that I started with vacant land was because I had people who knew how to do it. I knew people who knew how to do it. I knew developers, just kind of mainly from church and mutual relationships and stuff. But I always asked we did our first wholesale deal. We did, the lots on Traxler Street, and we made $20,000, and that was great, but it was a terrible process. I mean, it was long, it was annoying, it was hard to get in touch with them. The closing was difficult. And, I said, if I'm going to do this, rather than doing this deal 10 times, why not do, $1 million deal and make one fee for $200,000 and, go vacation for the rest of the year. I mean, not really, but that was the thing that started the idea of doing land because, I don't know. I mean, maybe not in Maui, but like here, there's actually a pretty good amount of vacant land. I mean, if you go on the outskirts of Greenville, there's a lot of land. And we're not landlocked, so that kind of helps.
Yeah, that helps.
But
there's an unlimited amount of land out there around your area. Yeah, we're a little limited, but still.
So, I mean, that's kind of how I got started, is that I just, I started calling on land, and I started getting an idea. It was a long process and a lot of failed attempts, but, I started working with a lot of builders who could tell me what they were looking for and how much they would pay per acre, and then I started looking for land, and trying to find things that worked for them. And the issue, I think the issue is that it does require a skill set. I mean, wholesaling a house, like, as long as you can get it under contract, like, you don't even need to know what you have to wholesale it. I mean, really all it takes is someone who's knowledgeable to come in and say, oh, wow, that is worth what you're asking. I'm going to buy it. But when you're talking about land, I mean, builders don't want to see stuff until it's been vetted, and so what that entails is a process that I call like the entitlement process. It's almost like title work, but just on a little bit bigger of a level. So there's a lot of things that have to do with the developability of a property, that I could run through if you want me to.
Sure. I'd love that.
Okay. So, I mean, it depends on the type of property. If it's custom homes, like big lots, of course you can do like septic, but most of the time you're looking for, sewer accessibility and capacity, which means that, that there's sewer lines in or around the property. You're looking for water lines, obviously, like electric lines, you got to make sure all the utilities are there. That's huge. But then probably the next biggest thing is going to be zoning. So you can go find a huge 100-acre, piece of property. You can do all your math and run your numbers and say, man, we could do, 500 houses here. But if the county won't let you or the city won't let you, it's just a pipe dream. So you have to actually go take some steps and spend a lot of money to, or not a lot of money, but some money to get an engineer to look at the property and even go to some zoning hearings. And so it can be a longer process. I mean, when you wholesale a house, you can get it under contract and say, hey, I need to close in 15 days. And the right person with the cash who's willing to do it is, can do it. But with the entitlement process with land, you're looking at a couple months. I mean, even on the smaller projects, you still have to make sure that everything lines up with, zoning and utilities. And, there's some other issues that you can run into, like wetlands, and flood zones and all that fun stuff. So it does take a little bit longer, but on the flip side, landowners are willing to give you a lot more time. So, you'll get something under contract, and rather than them giving you 30 days to close the deal, they'll give you 180 or 240 days.
Wow.
And so it's just kind of, gives you more flexibility and a lot more time to market it to people. So,
here's what I like about that. And it's similar to what I've said recently about why I'm really digging mobile home parks right now, is because it's hard. Like basically what you're saying is like, this is hard. Like, it's a lot of work. And 99% of the competition out there, I mean, let's be honest, like, doesn't want to work hard. 99% of people out there, they want to, they love those stories. And I mean, I love them too, right? But they love the stories of like, yeah, I was driving by this house. It looked vacant. I sent a postcard to the owner, and I said I can close in 10 days. So we closed in 10 days. I flipped it and made 40 grand. Yay. Like, it's like easy money. Like, and the whole time I was actually sitting on the beach getting my, toes waxed. Like, that's what people like want to hear. And that's what everyone envisions. But you're like, you know what? You went into land development, wholesaling, or you want to call that, because you're like, this is hard work. I mean, like we've interviewed 350 people, or whatever it is on this show. And I don't know anybody else who does like what you're doing, which means it's hard and you got to learn it. And there's all these steps. And so people are listening going like, well, that sounds too complicated. Like, yeah, that's why very few people do it. Yeah. But those who do it, you figure it out. You just ask questions and you figure it out, right?
Yeah. And all it takes is meeting one guy who can kind of run you through
Walk you through it.
For me, that's all it took, is meeting one guy, a friend of mine named Doug, who's just like an absolute saint. And I love him. And he is like one of the most caring and generous people in the world, very generous with his time as well. And so he was able to, he was also, mutual friends through church and some other things. And he was able to kind of walk me along and say, honestly, just say no to a lot of opportunities that I brought to him, and tell me why, not just say no, but actually tell me, here's why this one doesn't work. And then help me kind of along the way. And I think that, at the foundation of why I chose this, path is because I knew that I wanted to make money, I wanted to make a lot of money so that I can invest in a lot of properties, but I wanted to have time to do both, and so what land development offers is I could work 2 hours a day on that stuff and just make sure that my emails are checked and, that our, approvals are in place and whatever, our permits are pending, and I'm fine, and then that gives me time to know that I have, $100, $200, $500,000 in the pipeline and go ahead and now start looking for properties, to invest that money in.
One thing I love about your business, Josiah, is you didn't say, do I want to wholesale or do I want to be a single family investor or a multifamily investor? You said, yeah, I want to wholesale. I want to own multifamily. I want to own single family. I want to own small multifamily. And what you've done is you've taken skills that you've used to earn money to wholesale, converted that into properties wherever you find them. And you probably, I would bet, when you chose what properties to buy, it was based on contacts that you made through your wholesaling business with these other investors and agents and brokers and the kind of people that you rub elbows with. So you immerse yourself into this world. You make yourself valuable to all these people in it. And then you get the benefit of all their collective wisdom and knowledge as they guide you towards what you should buy. Here's a deal, you should go buy it. And you have the capital to do it. I think it's brilliant, especially at 20 years old, that you're able to do all this. But it all starts with you earning capital through wholesaling so that you can buy it. And I think a lot of people they try to skip that step. They say, how do I get into real estate without having to save money or work hard or earn money? And they just make it really hard on themselves, where for you do the hard work to earn the money, and then the investing part probably comes easier.
Well,
Tell us.
Sorry, go ahead. No, well, I was just going to say, I think that really that all goes back to like what I started with saying, is that I've always been obsessed with compound interest, and you can't experience compound interest unless you have capital to invest. And so, I'm not trying to like, be the next, Bezos or just create a new product. Like, I'm all into modeling, like you guys always talk about. And so for me, I know that other people are doing this, but I'm doing it too. And I'm just huge on getting my money to work, for me. And so that's what this all started with, is just the idea of compound interest. And so I'm very traditional in that sense. I'm not the guy. In fact, I actually have a story about how I turned down seller financing on one of our first deals because I just didn't know what it was and I wasn't comfortable with it, and I'd rather invest my own money. And I realized looking back that's dumb, and it was dumb at the time. But so I won't hide the fact that I am more of a traditional investor. But for me, it's just what I'm comfortable with. So.
Well, Brandon's really into modeling too. He's actually hitting the gym every day. He's working on the new Abercrombie and Fitch catalog.
That's what I do.
Bringing back the beard. Okay, so because the whole thing starts for you with earning income, tell us how you're finding the owners of these lots that you're contacting to wholesale. How are you getting their contact info?
Okay, so one thing I like to tell people about is, in the history of making cold calls, there is one guy in all of Greenville County that I cannot get in touch with. I know where he lives, but I it's too far to drive, so I don't want to drive to him. But I haven't been able to get in touch with them. But everyone else I have been able to reach out to, whether it's by text or phone or email or calling their office and tracking them down. So I'm really good at it. And I will say that, like, there's not many things that I think that I'm really good at, but I know that I'm good at tracking people down. And so, what I use 5 main tools. Number one, it's, and you guys might be familiar with some or all of these, but is the GIS systems for counties and for cities. Most counties and cities, if they're bigger than a couple thousand people, they're going to have something called a GIS system, which is short for something. And it's just a mapping, it's just a mapping system that has a ton of information on there, and you can look at a property. You should be able, if it's a good system, you should be able to look at a property and see where it is and who owns it and when they bought it and how much. And you can even look at, deeds and mortgages and all this fun stuff. And so that's what I've used. And, honestly, I'm going to run through these 5, and I'm not going to tell anyone how to find these things. You really just got to dig. But if you live in, any sizable city, you should have all of these things, accessible to you. So the second thing is the Secretary of State website. So when I find LLCs or entities in every state, there should be a Secretary of State website. So for South Carolina, it's scsos.com. And that's where I can, and by the way, almost all of these, I think all but one is free. So that one, you can look up any entity and it'll show you the member's name and their address. And, if the member has changed throughout the years, it'll show you that, when it was created, all that fun stuff. And so you can use that to track names, actual names of people who own the entities. Because a lot of people get to the point where they see an entity and they see a PO box and they're like, crap, like this is, I'm never going to get to them. But I actually go the extra mile and spend, 5 minutes to find the person's name and where they live. The third thing is the Register of Deeds. So a lot of times if something's really difficult, if I can't find it just by doing those two things, the GIS and the Secretary of State, then I'll use the Register of Deeds, which is also a website most of the time. Sometimes in really small places, it's, you actually have to go to the office and look at all the deeds. But most of the time, people are required to put their actual mailing address on a deed, and a lot of people feel uncomfortable doing a PO box and stuff. And so you can almost 99% of the time, unless it's a huge corporation, you will find someone's actual mailing address on the deed. And typically, it's very easy to find. You're on the deed; it's 4 or 5 pages long. You scroll until you see, grantee, and it'll just have a little colon and there'll be a blank, and typically they handwrite their address. And sometimes if I don't know their name, I'll search their address, and I'll just call the names that are associated with the address, and most of the time I'll end up, it'll be one of them. The last thing, or the fourth thing, is white pages. So, and there are a ton of these out there, the number finding, websites, but I typically use white pages. It's just what I've always done. And I think it's premium is $20 a month or something. And I can look up as many people as I want, and just find numbers and find addresses and relatives and all that fun stuff. And then the last thing, if like all else fails and I cannot find anything on anyone, I don't know. I think I found this out in high school, but if this is weird, I mean, if you don't know about it, it can be life changing. But there's something that you can do on Google where if you search something and you put quotation marks on it, around it, that it will only bring up things. I mean, because you search some stuff, even if it's a paragraph long, it'll pull up a million things. But if you do quotation marks around one word or one phrase, it'll pull up only those things that have those words in them. And so that can be super helpful because they might be doing business in another state or another county, or maybe they even got an award for something that they did, and you can just find out, John Smith, member of this LLC got an award for being a good steward of whatever, and and then you have his name. So those are the 5 things that I use: the GIS, Secretary of State, Register of Deeds, white pages, and the Google quotation marks. So
that's cool.
Now you're doing a lot of reaching out, which is great. We call that lead generation, but most successful people don't just excel at lead generation, they excel at lead follow-up. How are you keeping track of all these people, the notes, the conversations you've had, reminding yourself to follow up, that stuff?
So growing up, I mentioned I was homeschooled. Shout out to my mom. She's amazing and had a lot of patience with me. But, one of the things I really learned and excelled in, as a homeschooler, was just scheduling and planning. You pretty much start out and you're already in college because you have to do your own thing or else nothing gets done, and so you're not in a classroom of people and you're kind of just following along. And so because of that, I've always been really good at scheduling. And so when, after we got married, I remember yesterday, we went to Barnes & Noble and, Christiana had to beg me to buy this thing because it was $20, and at the time that was our life savings. But I bought a schedule. It was just a normal college schedule, and every single time I called someone, I would count the pages. Oh my gosh, that was so annoying. I would count the pages and and say, okay, I'm going to call them back in exactly 4 weeks. And so I would write it on the schedule, and I would look through that even 2 or 3 months in advance. I would flip 20 or 30 pages, and I would have 2 or 3 people to call back every single day. And that's how I managed follow-ups basically.
Wow. Is that still how you're doing it?
Honestly, that is not still how I'm doing it. I have become I think I've just changed how I do things a little bit more because at this point I'm doing a lot bigger deals. And so, most of the time if it's a mom and pop, if they say no, you have no idea if they're going to change their mind. But most of the time with these larger corporations, they'll pretty much tell you like, hey, when we just refinanced, we're not looking to sell for another 18 months. And then you got your follow up. But no, I use apps at this point, like calendar, and I use a ton of alarms. In fact, I'm surprised none of them have gone off yet. I have probably, like, legitimately, you could scroll on my alarms for maybe like 30 seconds or a minute. Like, I have so many alarms every day.
That's
so I don't know why that works for me, but it's kind of morphed and changed over time. But I've always followed up with people, and all of the deals that I've done, literally, like, all of the deals that I've done to make fees, I'll say this, I don't think we succeeded in getting a contract signed without at least half a dozen calls. At the very, very, bare minimum. So, like I said, I'm not trying to be the next, I'm innovator in this space. Like I am traditional in that sense too. And I'm not scared to say it. Like, I know a lot of people don't want to make phone calls because they have these, like, hey, Josiah, don't you know, like, I've had people say, like, there's this program where you can, like, dial 200 people's phone numbers at once. And, like, when they answer it, like, does this automated thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But, like, I want to actually be able to, like, have a personal touch. And, I can't do that. Like, if I'm calling, saying, hello, I am interested in your property, like in Greenville, then it's like, you might as well just send a letter. And for me, I like calling because I've had people thank me for calling them rather than sending them a letter. Like, they've literally said, I really honestly am not interested, but I just wanted to say thank you. And if I'm ever interested in selling, I will call you first because you called me. Like, you put in the extra effort. And so that's worth the world to me. And so that's why I've always done cold calling.
Well, here's something I'll point out there. I think, there's a lot of stuff I can pull out there, but one is that a lot of people think they have to build this massive system. They hear a guy or a lady on the podcast, and they hear somebody say, yeah, I've got this system and this, and I use Podio that interacts with this thing, and it automates this email that goes out to this thing. And people are like, oh man, I don't have any of that. I don't understand it. So then they turn on the TV and they watch their Dancing with the Stars every night, right? Because they don't have that big thing. But I love that you just said, you went to Barnes & Noble, you got a planner, like a calendar thing, and you just flip forward 90 days or, 50 days or 40. Like, who cares what you use? Just use something that works for you, and you can get better over time. Like, now you found that alarms work better. Some people love the Podio stuff. Like, I just cannot figure out Podio. I've tried it 100 times. That's like one of the more common, really complicated things. My brain just is not smart enough to handle it. So instead, I use Pipedrive today. I found that I have a lot of success with Pipedrive because it's a little more simple, and I've also used Trello, which I love Trello because it's very... Anyway, it doesn't matter what you use as long as you're using it and as long as you feel like you're having success with it. So start somewhere and stop thinking you got to get to the guy who's doing 400 deals a month level.
We literally just heard someone say, I use a notepad calendar that I write on and notifications on my phone. And he did a 6-figure wholesale fee with that system, right? So it just goes to show the CRM doesn't matter. It's whatever your brain likes. Brandon, I think that's so well said. I'm the same with Podio. I look at it and it just doesn't make any sense. And I put so much effort into figuring out Podio that I don't actually do my business that I was supposed to do.
You guys are making me feel as old as you are.
Hey, wait a second. All right. So
that's the first time anyone's ever called us old on this podcast.
I know.
Well done, Josiah.
Very well. Okay, you said bigger deals, and so I want to know, what does that look like? What does a good deal look like to you today? Like, what do you get it under contract for? What do you sell it for? What kind of profit are you making? Do you have any examples?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I do have an example. One that's upcoming. It's a property right down the street from my house, and it really didn't start as anything big. It was a guy with 5 acres, and 5 acres, by the way, is kind of on the lower end of what you want to be doing if you're in fact, it's probably too small. If you're looking to do a deal with like a big builder, they're looking at probably anywhere between 10 and 20 as their sweet spot. Anything bigger, you have to do in like these big phases. Anything smaller, they just don't want to touch. So I started out by calling him. It's just this old rundown house. I didn't even know, but it's actually, it's only 150 feet of frontage, but it actually goes back like 2,000 feet or something crazy. And so it's 5 acres. And so I called him. One of those times he said no, and then I finally got a price out of him, and we got that under contract. And I I was in the process of going around to people asking for sewer easements, which is a whole other conversation. But basically, you have to buy, access to part of someone's property just to run the sewer through their property. And while I was doing that, I actually came across this family. It was like they have this commune. It's kind of interesting, and they own this street, and so it's right next to it. And you would never know because they all have different last names, but they're all a family. And, I talked to the guy I was asking about the sewer easement, and he's like, what if we just sold it to you? And so they threw in, long story short, they threw in another 10 acres. And so we now had a 15 acre property that, by the way, is like in, super, super central Greenville. Like, I mean, there's no 10 or 15 acre tracts around me. And we just pieced it together. And that wasn't anything on my part. It was, it was totally a blessing. So, we got that one under contract. We have it under contract. I have it under contract for $100,000 an acre, which is a pretty high price. But we found a local builder who, recently signed a contract with us to buy it for $125,000 an acre. And so we're making, I think it's 14.9 something acres. And so it'll end up being, I think it's like $355,000.
Wow.
And so I'm splitting that with my friend Doug. He's awesome, and he's helped me through the process. And like, I don't want to come across as someone who like knows everything, because like before I did that deal, which by the way was only a couple months ago that I really started on that, I had no idea what a sewer easement was. I mean, I didn't know what wetlands were. I had no idea what I was doing. But I got it under contract, and I made, like you guys always talk about, like I took the first action, to get something done. And it could have totally fallen off the face of the earth, just like the 10 other deals that I had under contract at the time. But it's just the one that's kind of been, really successful. So I'll walk away with 170,000 from that one.
If that's not a good endorsement for taking action, I mean, you literally just said, this is awesome. I didn't know what a sewer easement was, and turned that into a $355,000 deal just because you went out there and did the hard thing. Like, I guess, Brandon, the point you made, which is we should circle back to it, this is only available for Josiah to do because other people aren't doing it, and the only reason other people aren't doing it is specifically because it's hard. If it was really easy and you could automate this and you could just blast out a phone number or a text message to everyone that owned that land and they would just reply, that opportunity would be available for about 2 months before Google figured it out. And then none of us would ever have a chance to do something like that. It's because of the barrier to entry that makes that possible. And that is so encouraging that you don't need to even really know very much about what you're doing. You just got to go find a person who wants to sell that's motivated, find a person who wants to buy, figure out a way to bring those two people together and make your money.
Well, and I'll be the first one to say also that, like, I'm, I've said this, this is the third time I've said this, but I'm like very traditional, and I'm also like just, I don't like change. It took a long time. I got even comfortable in my grandma's trailer. I didn't even want to move from there. Like I'm very comfortable wherever I'm at. And so for me and for Christiana and for our business, that's actually been, hard because I don't want to do different things, but so I say that because, there are a lot of people who say, I'm just not like that. Like, I don't like doing different things. I'll just do what I do and I'll be successful. And that's fine. It's totally fine to do what you do and be successful. And a lot of people do that. But, what really got me, from, making 20,000, 30,000, like in these little deals to now making 6 figures on pretty much every deal that I make or that I do, was just, doing something like extremely uncomfortable. So I know that sounds cliche, but
no, it's so good. It's so good. And because that's where success is usually found, like big success. You can get little success with luck and one-off stuff, but big success is doing the hard things and doing the things that you're uncomfortable with. So kudos to you for doing that. Now, you're doing this at 20 years old. So I'm wondering, there's people listening to this show who might be 20, 25, 30. Yeah. Everyone's young compared to somebody, right? But have you found your age to be a benefit or a hurdle in your investing?
I have a story about that. When people ask me how old I am, I always say something. I don't have a one-liner necessarily, but I always say something along the lines of like, I'm old enough to buy your land, or I'm old enough to develop it, or I'm old enough to sign this contract. And then I'll tell them later, I'll tell them I'm 20. Or if they really push me, I'll say I'm early 20s. But I mean, yeah, I do find it to be, not that it is, but it definitely, for me, like I'm thinking, dang, if I was a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old or something, I would probably not want to sell my land to this 20-year-old kid who just dropped out of college, and so, for me, it's more of like a projection upon them, and maybe they really don't care, but I care. And so I kind of keep it a little bit of a secret, but it really hasn't been too big of an issue. I mean, I don't shave very often, and I try to keep it that way. And I try to look older when I can, but, thankfully, I haven't run into too many, issues, with the whole age thing. And I would have expected more, honestly.
Well, what I think is interesting is, I mean, yeah, there might be some people out there who they don't want to sell to a 20-year-old, right? That is very well possible. But what I think you probably are getting, and you probably know this, or maybe you haven't realized it, but the fact that you attract these mentors into your life that want to help you, like if you mentioned a couple of them, you've given shout outs to them on the show already. That's awesome, right? They want to help you. That's not because you're 50 years old. It's because largely you're 20 and you're excited and you're taking action. And so if you're young, like listen to this show right now, like know that like, yeah, you might have some hurdles. There might be a little bit of difficulty somewhere because somebody might have a problem with it. But if you can solve their problem, they'll get over it. But the real benefit is the fact that other people want to help you when you're young. Yeah, and they're excited to see that. Have you found that in your life where just people like helping you?
Yeah. No, I mean, I found, a lot of, in fact, we just recently bought a duplex near downtown Greenville from a guy. And, I mean, he was a really, really nice guy. He was actually like a financial consultant. And he would go on and on when we would get together and talk. He would go on and on about how he just wished that he would have gotten started as young as we did, and so I think, to be honest, at least in that case, that definitely helped the deal along. I mean, because he was excited that someone like me was getting started as young as, me and Christiana have. So, I think in some cases it definitely helps. And, if you ever, at first, I'll be honest, it was hard when I hadn't done any deals, but, if you associate yourself, or if you get someone to just allow you to drop their name, like whenever you want, like if you're just like, hey, for me, it's always been like Doug, hey, Doug, can I just drop your name whenever, and so if it ever becomes really difficult, I'll just say, well, I'm 20, but I work with a guy who's done this since he was 20 and he's now, 55. And so I'm really just kind of a liaison for him. And then, then it feels more like, oh, this is just an employee, and they don't have to know I'm, getting a 50% cut. Like, they can just feel like I'm, just a little paper pusher, and it doesn't matter to me, Yeah. So you can always kind of use people's names if you want to as well, if you get their permission. I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah. Is there a story there?
Yeah. I don't know if I want to talk about it.
You don't have to.
I mean, I'll go ahead and say, I mean, basically, there's this gentleman who, I'm sure he's a great guy. He's a, pretty renowned developer, and, we were at one time associates, and, not working together necessarily, but I was trying to find him stuff, and then, and I called on a property that was very close to one of his, and I mentioned, I actually know the guy, and I said, I know the guy who, who's doing this stuff down the road. And I ended up, that deal actually fell through, and I guess he followed up with them a couple months later, and they were like, oh, you're that guy? No, we're not dealing with you because your, friend, or coworker, I guess, like he didn't close the deal. So we're not working with anyone associated with him. So that, it's definitely backfired sometimes. And I got a lot of, flack from the guy who I name dropped, of course, because he lost a deal because I just felt like mentioning his name because I didn't feel like I could get the deal on my own. Yeah.
I hear you. Well, you win some, you lose some, but it's good that you recognize like what works and what doesn't. So where do you see your business headed in the next few years? Like, are you sticking with the wholesaling land development deals? Are you growing the rental portfolio larger and larger? Where do you want to
go? So I had a goal to double our units, like I mentioned, and I again, I'm very like step by step. So once I get one place, I just want to kind of hang out there for a while. And so once we got to, past 32 or whatever the number was for doubling our units, I just said, why don't we just hold off and stuff. And oh my gosh, Christiana, she's crazy. I wish she was here, but she's always pushing me, maybe a little bit too hard. And and she's like, no, 200 units in 2 years. And I'm like, what are you talking about, woman? Like, she's talking about 100% ownership, by the way. Like, she's not talking about like, let's syndicate a deal, like,
yeah.
So she's amazing. And the only reason that I'm here is, that we're here is because of, her. And I can get to that later when we talk about the deep dive. But
yeah,
she's always pushing me. And I think that sometime, in the next couple of years, we want to get to 200 units. And for me, I like nice stuff, I like nice cars, and I like the idea of a cool house, but like, it doesn't really go past that for me. Like I've always thought, of being a billionaire or something, but for me right now, it's kind of just sticking to what I do. And I'm sure if we have another conversation in a couple of months or a year, that will have completely changed, and I'll be doing something different and making $1 million a year, 7 figures, now 6 isn't good enough. And so, it'll get there. But for now, to be honest with you, the properties that I have under contract, it's 5 units here, 6 units there, 10 units, in Macon, like, and, I'm just kind of growing organically, and I don't want to push it too hard and max myself out, but I really enjoy the land development stuff, and more than I even enjoy the deals, I just enjoy the guys that I do it with. And I could, just hang out with Doug and my dad and our other investors, like, just all day, and it would be a blast. So for me, I love where I'm at right now. And, I'm excited to grow. My ultimate goal is being a billionaire by the time I'm 65. And that's just based on, like, the whole compound interest thing. I always said, like, if I can invest $100,000, from the time I'm 20 to the time I'm 65, if I can invest $100,000 a year at 17.8% interest, then I'll be worth $1 billion.
Wow.
And so
really?
For me, like, yeah.
Wow, crazy.
So that was always kind of the goal, but it's, it's a pipe dream. Who knows? Maybe, by the time I'm 65, $1 billion will be like being, $1 million.
I don't know, but that's still gonna be a lot of money. That's cool though. That's interesting. And about the investing $100,000 a year, that's cool. It's amazing, the compound interest.
I honestly wish that I could tell you that I had like a step-by-step plan to be worth XYZ dollars in this many years and all that stuff. But to be honest, like, at this point, I'm still like kind of reeling from the massive blessings that we've experienced so far. And so I'm always kind of reminding Christiana, like, hey, let's just be like, let's be okay with what we have. And she's, always trying to push me. And so I guess I kind of take that place in the ring, and so I'm always kind of pushing back, like, hey, let's just chill out and relax. And so I'm sure that, I'll sit down and I'll read another one of your books, and I'll be all pumped up on a vacation, and I'll be like, I need to make another goal, and I'll do it, but for now I'm kind of just enjoying where we're at. So I hope that's not the answer you were looking for.
No, that's great. And by the way, I just ran a calculation. It is, if you were to put, let's say you were 18 to 65, if you started with $100,000, or what you could say, 18, you put the $100,000 in, and did $100,000 a year, and I did a little bit higher, around up to 18%. Yeah, it works out to $1.75 billion. That's insane.
I think it's exactly. I ran it like I've spent. My wife laughed at this, but I downloaded a compound interest app, and I don't know. I was obsessed with it for a while. She made me delete it, but I would be on the toilet or just like hanging out, and I would be like on my little compound interest app, and she laughed one time because we on the weekend, your phone shows you like, here's how much time you spent on each app, and like 20 or 30% of my time was on this compound interest app. It was like 8 hours for that week. I was just like doing my little numbers, like so.
That's hilarious.
It helps to keep the goal in mind, I guess.
There you go, dude. That's awesome. All right, well, let's shift gears here. You mentioned the deal deep dive, so why don't we head there now?
Okay.
Boom, boom, boom. All right, time for the deal deep dive. This is the part of the show where we dive deep into one particular deal that you've recently done, and let's see what you got, Josiah. What we got like 7 questions, I think it is, here about that. So first of all, what kind of property are we going to be talking about here on the deal deep dive?
Okay, so this one is a multifamily wholesale deal, I guess you could say.
All right, multifamily wholesale deal. All right, number 2.
How did you find this multifamily wholesale deal?
funny you ask. Just like everything else,
Cold call.
cold called. Yeah, and it did take me many. I mean, this was probably the longest one. I think I called her the first time back in the summer of 2018, and the deal didn't close until the beginning of June of this year. So,
wow. All right. It takes time. How did you get? By the way, let me even go deeper on the cold call. How did you get how did you know about this property? Do you pull like public data lists? You just drive by it, or like what's your kind of go-to for getting the lead initially?
Okay. So, I mean, I don't want to like repeat myself, but like pretty much, I mean, the same 5 things that I said earlier, like I used the GIS. They had a corporation. When I went on Greenville County and I searched all the multifamily property and I sorted it by when the last time it was sold was, like this was like the second property. The last time it had been sold, they actually built it back in like the 50s. And so this one was actually interesting. So I mentioned I only have one guy who I can't get in touch with in Greenville. This was the second person.
Okay.
So like I was not able to get in touch with them, but for whatever reason, every month I would get this little reminder, and it was just long enough to where I would be like, okay, I can do it this time. Like I can find something new, And so I would always get in touch with their daughter or their son-in-law or, and it never really went anywhere, but I kept doing it every month. I would call someone and just see if I could get in touch with someone. And by the time they actually were interested, they actually called me on their personal phone just because I was bothering their family.
That's cool. No, I've never thought of that before, about the idea of like just finding all the properties, like if you get the data of all the properties and then sort by last sold and go to the oldest ones. Like, I don't know, that's never occurred to me before. But that's kind of a really cool idea. Just like start hitting them from the back of that list.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Very cool. All right. Well, number 3, how much was it?
Okay. So the deal was, I got it under contract for like $28,000 a unit, so it was 62 units. So I think that's 1.736 million, and that took a lot of negotiation. I know there's not really a part in the deep dive where I can like tell the story, but I don't know. I mean,
yeah, please. Well, that was the next question. Is like, what about how did you negotiate it? So there,
okay,
it's kind of there.
Okay.
Yeah, tell us the story.
So, pretty much, I mean, I told you Christiana's a rock star, and she'll be, like dormant. She's like a volcano. She'll be dormant, and she'll be like, just kind of waiting for her opportunity. And then all of a sudden, prime time, and she's there, telling me exactly what to do. And so, like I said, I had been calling and calling and calling. And to be honest with you, this is just another thing I want to point out. This was my least favorite call of the month. Like literally, this lady was not nice. Even once I got her number, and she said, I might be interested, it was another like 6 months because she just went back and forth. And, she wasn't the nicest person in the world. Sometimes I would just leave a message. It was their home phone, which is terrible. And like, it was definitely my least favorite call, but I still called them back every month. And around December of 2018, I remember it was right before Christmas. She finally said, I might be getting ready. I might be there soon. And so it was months and months. And basically how it ended up going is, I'm just going to try to find the part in my notes. So to be honest, this is stupid, but like I knew what people were paying, because like I said, I had the list, and I knew that people were paying, in my area, people are for these, they were all 1 bedrooms except for like 6 apartments, which was really interesting. But they were originally like university housing, almost like dorms, but they all have their own bathrooms and kitchens. So they were just your standard 1-bedroom apartment. And I knew that people were buying these things for 50 or 60, and so I just did the stupid thing, and I threw out a number. And so I said, I will offer you $24,000 a unit. And she was like, I don't know what they're worth. I don't even know if that's a good price. And so, and then I said, well, I talked to my partners, I did the classic thing, I can go up to 26. And then, a month later, well, I talked to them again, and maybe if we squeeze it, we can do 28. And so we finally agreed on 28. And basically, what happened is we were planning on meeting like the next week. And she said, well, before we meet and sign this thing, I really want to have an appraiser look at it. And for me, that was like, oh, it's over. Yeah. It's totally done. Like an appraiser's an appraiser. So they're going to come out and look at it. And by just the absolute grace of God, she had the appraiser set a date to come out and look at it. And it was days before, and she kept on calling him, and he never responded. And so, she just never got back in touch with him. And she's like, I'm tired of this. I'm just going to do it. And so, we set a date for that next week to go and sign the contract. We were that weekend, we were at Lowe's. We were doing something, picking up something. And this is where I'm talking about like my wife coming in, and doing her thing. And I get a call from this lady, and she's like, you know what? I'm not ready. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it later. I'm just going to be a couple of years. And, my heart sinks, and I'm like, crap, because I had already thought, I could make easily 6 figures on this one. And so, and at the time, I remember this was like the only one I really felt like I had in the pipeline. And so, we were at Lowe's, and she said, I'm not going to do it. And I hung up, and I was just, I wasn't crying, but I was like, oh, this sucks. And, I was in such a bad mood. And, Christiana just, she just, held my arm. She's like shaking me, and she's like, hey, you can do this, call her back, And so I was like, what am I going to say? Like, I have nothing to tell her. Like, when I want it, like, I really, really want it, please, basically I told her, hey, I feel a responsibility to these investors who I've already told about the deal. We're getting ready. We've already invested some money and time into the due diligence. And she said, let's meet tomorrow and let's sign it. And so it was all because of Christiana shaking me up a little bit and just saying, hey, let's, try one more time. And we were able to, kind of get it under contract and go from there.
Dude, that's awesome. I love that story. I mean, I tell people often, like on like webinars when I'm teaching on the BiggerPockets webinar every week, which by the way, you can sign up at biggerpockets.com/webinar. But when I talk about like the power of the follow-up, like when you get a no, that oftentimes that all that means is no for now. So like set a reminder. And there's a way to actually do this in the BiggerPockets calculator, like the actual like the calculators we have. But even if you have to like set a reminder on your phone, with every time you make an offer, like follow back up later. And I love your story. Like you followed back up 5 minutes later or whatever inside of a Lowe's, and you were able to get it. But just that follow up is because a no doesn't always mean no. Sometimes people say no because they're scared or because they need to think about it or because of 100 different reasons. So follow up again, and it's the follow up that really can help you get a lot more deals every year. So all right, so once you sign this thing, actually, David, I'm taking your question. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, normally we'd ask how you fund it, but I'm assuming you wholesale this to someone else, so you didn't fund it, correct?
Correct. Yeah, at the time it was a little bit big for me. So
okay,
I think it still would be.
And that explains what you did with it too. So tell me, what was the outcome from this deal?
Okay, so it's frustrating, but it was good. So I told the guy I got a broker without really looking at it. I sent him some stuff, and I said, and he's a friend, and so I said, hey, what do you think this would go for? Like pretty quickly. I'm like, what's a conservative price? And he was like, $38.40 a unit. And so I was like, oh my Lord, I had like money balls in my eyes. And so I had some gentlemen who had been asking me about apartments, which is why this came up in the first place. And we had met like 2 weeks. We'd officially all had, met in the conference room, and just like, I was telling them what I was looking into, and they were like, I got pretty much the verbal from them. Yes, we want to do something very soon. And that was 2 weeks before this. And so that just a side note, that goes to show like it's really important to be doing these things simultaneously, because, I have had deals where I get a great property under contract and I haven't had the right people to close it. But so we were doing all this simultaneously. And I told these guys, hey, next deal I find, you're going to get it. And they were a great group of, Christian guys. They're all doctors here in Greenville. And so, I brought it to him and I said, hey, I have this email from a broker and he says it's worth 40. And so here's what I'll do. I basically, if you do the calculations, 28, I think is 75% of 40. 70%, I think. Yeah, 70% of 40. So I said, I have it under contract for 30% under market value. I will sell it to you for 85% under market value, and you guys can realize that extra fun stuff. Because for me, like, wholesaling means giving someone a good deal. I hate, oh my gosh, all these wholesalers around here who are like, I'm wholesaling this $200,000 house for $199,000, and you're like, great, thank you. Yeah. So I was like, I'm going to give these people a deal, and so I stuck by my word, and I said, you know what? I know I'm losing out on, literally $360,000 or something. But I ended up, doing pretty well. And I walked away from that deal with $372,000 fee.
Wow.
They got an offer the next week for somewhere in the 50s per unit.
Wow.
And so that's the frustrating part. So, you know, I was actually off, and so was, you know, the guy asked about it. I should have wholesale that thing for, you know, low 40s, you know, and I could have made closer to $1 million. But I mean, for me, you know, like I said, relationships is everything, and I have more than enough. And so I'm not going to try to, you know, nickel and dime people, you know, for a couple extra bucks. But it was a great deal. So
That's awesome, dude. So I guess that kind of sums up my last question. But if you have anything else to add, what lessons did you learn from this deal?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just restate that, like, I think it's just be good for your word. You know, I mean, there are way too many cutthroat people in this business, especially the land development business, to be specific, and a lot of snakes and smooth talkers, and you know, a lot of times it's not a fun business to be in. And so I love to be the one guy who people look to and say, man, it was fun doing that deal with that guy, you know, because I gave him a great deal. And like, sometimes people honestly look at me and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you realize how much this is worth. Like, did you say the wrong number when you told me how much you'll sell it to me for? Like, and I'm just like, no. I mean, I you know, built in profit for myself when I'm good, you know, like that's fine. So I like being the one true wholesaler who's still around in Greenville who give people a good deal. So.
Yeah, and that's a great reputation to have. So, yeah, super cool, dude. All right, yeah, let's move on. I was looking at the fire round. I think we should skip the fire round today. I think we're gonna move right on because this has been a long show, and I don't want to, you know, make it go too much long. No, this is really good. So let's just move right past it. Well, I'm looking at the questions that I had originally pulled, and like every one of them you have already answered today. It's like, what's the best way to get in touch with people? How do you find, you know, I need a cold call. How do I find this? So it's all the stuff I had already like planned on asking. We might as well we'll skip it and we'll move right on. All right. So let's just head over to the next segment of the show, which we lovingly call our Famous Four. All right. The Famous Four. These are the questions that come direct. No, these are not ones that come direct out of the fire. Now I'm all thrown off because we're not doing the fire round. Let me say this again. This is the part of the show where we ask you the same 4 questions that we've asked every guest every week forever now. But before we get there, let's hear about what's going on this week over on the BiggerPockets Business Podcast. Let's hear what's going on this week over on the BiggerPockets Money Podcast. All right, with that, let's get to the Famous Four. Question number 1. What is your current favorite real estate related book, Josiah?
My favorite real estate book is probably The Art of the Deal, because I think that, and I don't mean this in like not a selfish way, like a I don't know, self-righteous way or something, but I think that like Trump kind of reminds me of myself a little bit in that, like, back when he started, like, it was a lot of boots on the ground, you know, like, you know, every time he went to a meeting, like, it was not, you know, most of the time it wasn't like a phone call or a text, you know. So I like him, you know, for in some areas, like, I like, you know, he's
be very careful how you say that. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, he's a very successful businessman. So
all right. The Art of the Deal, which I actually have not read that of all. I don't think I've actually read it. Okay. I read a couple of those other ones.
Josiah, on finding a book Brandon hasn't read. Yeah. To do it. What's your favorite business book?
My favorite business book I read before I was in college. It's I actually, is it okay if I do too?
Please.
Okay. Number 1 is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. That one is just like, you know, I mean, hugely.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
I mean, it's definitely amazing book. The second one is The Richest Man in Babylon. And I think the thing you'll see between all these books is that, like, I like storytellers, you know, so I like seeing, that's why I love the podcast, because, like, I love how people's stories teach a lesson. And so I like The Richest Man in Babylon because it's, you know, it's all one big story. So.
Yeah, it's great.
Me too. Love those. Okay. When you're not making 6 figures on a deal or crying in a grocery store with your wife pulling you through it,
Lowe's.
What are some of your favorite hobbies? Lowe's.
Okay. So I actually, I made a note to say I did, like, take a break from hobbies for, like, the first year of, like, doing the business stuff, because, I mean, we were just, like, we had no time, and, like, I gained a lot of weight, and, like, man, it was bad. I started eating badly and everything. But I'm back into it now. And so I used to do a lot of working out, and I did I don't know if you guys know what parkour and free running is.
Yeah. Parkour.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like the videos on YouTube, people
Yes.
jumping over, stuff.
I just can't not think of Dwight Schrute on The Office every time I think
that's one of the best openings.
Best scenes of that show. Yeah. Anyway,
they definitely were the ones who made it famous, unlike the people who actually do it.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing stuff on grass and concrete and stuff. It was too dangerous. But I there's a local trampoline park that I have a membership to, and so I do that for my workouts. I go pretty much every day, so it's fun.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to go to one of those trampoline parks. I've not yet done it, but I'm gonna.
Do they have one in Maui?
They do not. Maybe we'll have to open one. Let's do it, Josiah. Come on. You got a lot of free time. All right, number 4. What do you believe sets apart successful real estate investors from all those who give up, fail, or never get started?
Okay, so this one is also kind of like twofold, and I feel like is that okay? If it's twofold? Okay.
There are no rules here.
Okay, so and I feel like I already mentioned these things, but I did want to say, so number 1, I think is surrounding yourself with people who have bigger goals than you. And honestly, the stupider you feel when you're around people, you should probably keep like hanging out with them. Like all the developers who I hang out with, I mean, they can talk way over my head, and they're making, millions of dollars a year. And those are the people you need to be hanging out with, in my opinion. And who, their goals are so much bigger than mine. I mean, if my goal, anyways. So the second part of that is, and I feel like anything I say to this question, it feels so cliche. So like, I feel like 100 people have already said it, like, I'm like, this was the question that I was like thinking about the most. I'm like, I don't want to be cliche, but I guess the one thing that kept on coming back to was, just trying like one more time. And I know it sounds cliche, but like, it really does come down to that, because I can't even explain how many times I was thinking about not calling that lady that month and just saying, I'm just not going to do it. Like I'll just skip this month, but I tried just one more time, and you just really never know. I mean, it's also another cliche thing to say, but you really never know, like when you're that, miner who's an inch away from gold or whatever the case may be. So.
I actually like cliches. I think cliches are cliches for a reason, because there's a lot of truth and wisdom in them. So, but no, I think those are great answers. Those are fantastic. I love that idea too of like, the get around people whose goals are way bigger than yours. Like, I think that's a powerful statement right there. So awesome, dude. All right. Well, David
Last
Green.
question of the day. Tell us, where can people find out more about you?
I guess the only place where we have a real presence is on Instagram. We're in the process of building a website and stuff like that. But Christiana's Instagram is Christiana. It's spelled like Christian with an A _ Pott, Pott. And mine is, Josiah _ Pott. So that's us. You can check us out. I honestly, if you really want to know more about our business, she probably posts more than I do.
Nice.
But she does, house flipping and stuff like that. So that's kind of fun.
Cool. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you for coming on today. I mean, I love your story. I love what you've done just in the few years you've been involved with this. And I think people like, stories like this give a lot of people who are, at home right now listening, they're in the car listening, they give people a lot of hope on like, oh man, well, if you can do it at 20 years old, like I can do this. I have no excuses. So yeah, thank you for coming on and just kind of like burying your soul today.
Thank you.
Incredible show. Thank you, Josiah. I am David Green 24 on Instagram. Brandon is Beardy Brandon on Instagram. And you were Josiah Pott. Is that correct?
Josiah _
Josiah _ Pott.
I don't think you have an underscore. I just looked you up when you were talking. Are you sure you do? That might have been just your wife. That's okay. You're too busy making money. I think it was just Josiah Pott. Anyways, though, thank you very much. It was a great show. It was awesome having you on. I am David Green for Brandon. 90 Days of Intention Turner. Signing off.
You're listening to BiggerPockets Radio, simplifying real estate for investors large and small. If you're here looking to learn about real estate investing without all the hype, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and be sure to join the millions of others who have benefited from BiggerPockets.com, your home for real estate investing online.